And before we get too much into this study, I just wanted to express my gratitude for being able to come out here, but also share a couple of things that I've learned in the week that I've been here. I've been doing a lot of exploring of the island, and there's two takeaways that are really, really relevant to the reason we're all here. The first thing that kind of hit home for me is the weather patterns and the climates between the Seattle area of the Pacific Northwest and Hawaii are interchanged. They are one. We have a phrase up there that we call Pineapple Express. That means that your water is coming straight towards us and we flood like crazy. The second thing that I realized is that flooding is real. And it's something to be able to recognize this conceptually in mind and go, yeah, there's statistics, there's data, flooding happens. It's a whole different thing to be wandering around downtown Honolulu wearing sneakers in the rain and realizing that nothing is going to dry out, period. And you have to walk through a giant puddle. So these are two lessons that were real that I took away from this. And what we're going to do is Sarah and I are going to go through a study that we did. She's going to introduce the background, the objectives, kind of how we began. I'm going to go through the study design, some early findings. Sarah will then talk about how those findings were used in the marketing campaign that was developed. And then both of us are going to kind of conclude with the second study and some takeaways. So I'll let Sarah begin with the background.
Thank you, Nathan. So I also want to start off by saying some thank yous. Thank you to Carol and DLNR for letting us be here today to present. Thank you to Nathan and Recon and Mar for their excellent work on all of this project. And not with us today is the public relations firm Pineapple Tweed. They also supported this effort, and I want to just give my gratitude to everyone that helped make this happen. And kind of like Nathan said, you know, it's personal. We've been here today, we were here yesterday, we were really talking about products. All right, we're making map products. We're talking about policies for insurance, but what does that really mean at the end of the day? It's about the people. So we decided, you know, well, what do the people here really know? So why this project? As you all might know, my office is the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency, so we're really concerned about climate change and those risks that are increasing for our community members here on island. Nathan kind of segued it perfectly. We share climate patterns, but really for us, it's, you know, that El Nino, La Nina. So when we have La Nina events, historically, we get more rain. Climate models are anticipating that La Nina frequency will double in the future, so we're more likely to have more extreme precipitation events. Also, we're updating our firm maps. Why is that? Because right now, about 78% of our island is unstudied. So we don't really know that risk. We don't really know what most people are facing. And also, has anybody out here ever done an outreach or education campaign? Show of hands. Okay, we got a couple, great. It's hard, it's really hard. And it's especially hard if you're trying to educate the public about things that might happen in the future, and you're trying to educate them about risks that we don't even know, so we can't really tell them. So we just thought, you know what, there's a lot we don't know. We don't really know our community's perceptions, we don't know their experiences, so we should probably figure that out. So this project really focused on allowing the city to better understand that. So our objectives were, we want to know our community's awareness of flood risk. We want to know their knowledge about flood insurance, and we also want to know about their experience with flooding. So I have to apologize, there is one typo on this. It should actually be 2021 that the project was awarded by FEMA. I don't know if anybody remembers 2019, 2020, kind of this thing called the pandemic, sort of put a log jam in procurement. I'm sure many of you experienced that. So we weren't actually able to contract this project until December of 2023. Our period of performance, because I do want to mention that this was a cooperative technical partnership program funded by FEMA, so thank you FEMA. Our period of performance ended in September 2024. So I just bring this to light to say, sometimes we feel like we need a lot of time to do good work. That's not true. You can do a lot in a very short amount of time, but it's challenging. So in 2023, December, we brought on Recon, MR, Pineapple Tweed, and we really got to work. We did survey development by interviewing flood insurance professionals and emergency management professionals to get a better understanding on that side to develop our initial survey. That launched in February and March of 2024. We took about a month to analyze those results, shared that with the public, created this outreach campaign, did a follow-up survey, analyzed those results, and created a final report. We're going to talk about all that in this presentation, but that's just to kind of give you some time frame on all of this. And with that, I'll pass it to Nathan.
So I'm going to cover the methodology and the study design, and we're going to start with the questionnaire. As Sarah mentioned, there were 2 questionnaires, there's before and after, so we're going to talk about the before questionnaire first. This was longer, this was more complex. There were 5 main topics that we were going to cover. The first thing that we wanted to introduce to the respondents, or to the residents we were talking to, is the concept of flood. And we thought that the way to do this was to ask them about their experience with floods. Has your house ever flooded? Has your friend's house ever flooded? It doesn't matter if it flooded because a dam broke, there was a hurricane, or my toddler flushed a diaper down the toilet and flooded my basement. We just wanted to get people thinking about the concept of water damage and the impacts. From there, we moved on to a section about awareness of the risk, their knowledge of different flooding and flood programs. We have a slide on that. We also talked about flood prevention activities or mitigation activities that people can do, as well as steps to prepare for recovery. We have a slide a little later on adoption rates, but more so we wanted to know what are the barriers? Why are people not purchasing flood insurance? And because this was being used to design a marketing campaign, we needed to understand what information sources people use and how trustworthy each of these information sources are coming from, because we want them to trust the information that's coming out. So here's a difficult to read slide that talks about the flood awareness and the knowledge. Some things that we measured is we gave them about 5 different types of flooding. It was like groundwater flooding, stream flooding, urban flooding, hurricanes, and storm surge. And we wanted to know what their perceived risk from each of those different flood types was. We also just wanted to get some basic facts in there. Do they know what flood zone they live in, if they live in a flood zone or if it's undetermined? Do they have opinions on climate change and the impacts on the frequency and severity of flooding and storms? Do they understand any of the information that's available from FEMA, what's covered by insurance, the assistance, the availability programs that are out there? We asked about the barriers, as I mentioned. So here's kind of a list of barriers that we presented people. We did provide them with another option. And then we asked a couple of unique demographics to the island. Ownership is not typically a unique demographic. But that's on here because the original study design was to only sample single-family home owners and to ignore renters and to ignore people who live in multifamily homes because they don't have as much control over what they can do and they can't really buy a flood insurance policy. But after some discussion, we decided that we wanted to hear from these people. We wanted to know what their opinions were, what their attitudes were, and what actions they are aware of or what they could do in their situations. There are simple things they can do to help mitigate, like move valuables off of the floor. And we wanted to be able to understand what their opinions are and what they do. The actual sample design was pretty simple. We used what's called an address-based sample. The USPS provides a list of 99.9% of deliverable addresses in the United States. We have a vendor. We asked them to pull 25,000 addresses from across the island. Our vendor, known as Big Brother, can also append such things as email and cell phone, and as a last resort, we asked them to append a landline. We also have GIS information, and in this case, we decided to append the flood zone, so we could gauge whether or not people accurately know what flood zone they live in. And then we started the actual survey outreach. All 25,000 of these addresses received a postcard. You're looking at the screenshot at the front. We gave them 2 or 3 days to respond, and then we started with an MMS text message campaign and an email campaign. We waited about 3 or 4 days between each contact, and we sent out a total of about 3 of each type of contact, text message or email, before we started calling on responders. After this, we went out and heard directly from people who manage multifamily buildings, like property managers, to get some of their input. And the final thing we did, once all of this data was collected, is we just opened the survey up to the general public, and it was pushed out through various different social media, marketing, etc., just to get a bigger gauge beyond our sample. In the end, it led to a little over 1,000 responses. It's a 4% response rate. Survey rates have been dropping quite a bit. But that's pretty average for what we saw, and about half of these came in through the postcards. And we'll see a reference to this a bit later, but mailing, direct mailers, is expensive, but it's worth it, because that's where you get most of your attention. So we'll go over a couple of key findings here. We asked about people's experience with flooding. About a third of residents have had some type of personal experience with flooding, and most of those did not have insurance or flood insurance at the time that this happened. We asked a question later, do you have flood insurance now? And about 1 in 10 of the group that did not have flood insurance now has a flood insurance policy. So we can say they recognize the hassle, recognize that flood risks are real, and when given the opportunity, they then purchased a flood insurance program. Only about 1 in 5 households in the sampled area have a flood insurance policy. And of the 80% who don't have a flood insurance policy, we asked why. And this was just hit on in the previous talk. I'm not at risk. I'm not worried about flooding. It's too expensive. I'm not going to spend the money on something that doesn't apply to me. So we'll let Sarah go on the other findings.
I'm going to kind of just keep on that one, and it's not in the slide, but I think it's really relevant also to what Edie was saying. So when we looked at all of these people and their experience with flooding, we found there was no statistically significant difference in their FEMA flood zone. So a special flood hazard area, an undetermined zone, and a flood zone X had almost the exact same amount of flooding experiences across the board. So it's important, and it comes into our marketing, why we really just kind of went with this, don't lose what you love in a flood, and everyone lives in a flood zone. We didn't want to lean into that FEMA flood zone language specifically for that reason. So what we also found, and lucky for us because we were wanting to do this outreach and education campaign, there's a large need for it. Only about 1 in 5 residents were aware that standard homeowners and renters insurance does not cover flood damage, or that hurricane insurance doesn't cover damage caused by water, and that properties not mapped in a FEMA high-risk flood zone were still at risk to flooding. So because I'm running this, I can jump forward a slide. So this was really important to us because it grounded what we wanted to talk about in our outreach and education campaign. So looking at all the findings, we realized that we need to increase awareness on flood risk. We also need to provide our community members with actionable and oftentimes very simple steps that they can take to reduce their flood risk. And there was a really big need for more information on insurance. So we used the findings to sort of help shape and frame our narrative. Like I mentioned, it really leaned into these actions folks can take that are an extension of flood insurance. That was one of the things people could do. As Nathan mentioned earlier, it's simple things. Elevate your belongings. Clean your gutters. Look around your property. Do you have standing water? Is there anything you can do to move that water away? Do you have a drain in your neighborhood that backs up a lot? Is there someone you can talk to? And as Nathan mentioned too, we wanted to look at multiple demographics, not just geographic demographics, age demographics, but actual household demographics. It was really important to us, especially here, we have a housing crisis. We recognize that there are many people that live in our community that are not homeowners, myself included. So we wanted to produce information that was useful for renters, people living in multifamily buildings, and not just single-family homeowners. So you can see here on the screen, we did a lot in a very short amount of time. So every one of those 25,000 households that were targeted in the initial survey received a follow-up postcard. It told them, hey, the findings are out from our first survey, check it out, go to our Get Flood Ready page, there's a lot of resources and information there. We had interviews with the different TV stations to get that message out. We had an internet and social media campaign. We did public service announcements on the radio in multiple languages. We sent direct messaging to city council members, state reps, and even to churches and civic clubs across the island. So, can I see a show of hands? Does any of this look familiar to anybody in the audience? Did you? Okay, we got one. Woo! Okay, a couple more. All right. Oh, I see more. All right, don't worry. You're not alone. We'll talk about it in a minute. But these are some of the outreach materials that we prepared as part of this outreach and education campaign. If you want, 2 of them are actually available on our back table if you're curious, so go ahead and check those out after this. So what did this all really culminate in? So throughout this effort, we had over 2 million touch points. We had over 120,000 people see these TV interviews. Over 2 million people saw the advertisements via television, internet, or the radio. Between the initial survey and the follow-up survey, we had over 1,000 people respond. We reached 28 out of 29 zip codes. Apologies, Canva to PowerPoint is not great in learning. We had over 4,300 website visits, which is really great. Recommend it, get flood ready. And yeah, we were able to connect with a lot of decision makers too and ask them to share out.
And then we wanted to be able to measure the effectiveness of the campaign. Not only in terms of reach, but Sarah gave you a lot of that, but we wanted to see if the campaign had moved the needle for anyone who had seen or heard about the messaging. So we did a follow-up survey where we asked about awareness, and then we also asked about the effectiveness of the campaign on people's attitudes and if it actually changed any of their behavior. So I'm going to do a survey right now. How many of you believe that the campaign had an impact on people's attitudes and beliefs about flooding? Okay. And how many of you believe that it had an impact on people's actions and behaviors? Okay. We'll go through and find out. It's interesting.
Who's going to win? Which camp's going to win?
The second study used a much smaller sample, time, money. So in this case, we only pulled 12,000 addresses, and we were unable to do a second round of mailing postcards. Instead, we did the other sections where we sent out text messages, where we sent out emails, we did follow-up phone calls. We resulted in about 268 surveys out of 12,000, so the response rate was about half, about 2% as opposed to 4%. This speaks again to the effectiveness of mailers in being able to get people involved and inform people. But we found some really interesting things. We looked at those people who said that they had heard of this outreach campaign, like they were aware of the messaging. And 2/3 of them were like, yeah, hearing something, knowing something about this, I gained a little bit of knowledge. And knowledge is a little bit of power. And quite a few people actually took some type of action. So this specific question was, okay, you saw this campaign, did you do any of these things as a result of the campaign? And it started a lot of conversations. Not many people actually did stuff. About 10% of people did stuff, like improved their property. Only 2% say they purchased insurance as a result of this, but it got the conversation going. And it got people thinking, and it got people talking, and it got people planning. The other interesting thing is it did have an impact on people's attitudes as far as risk assessment goes. We had the 5 different types of flooding, and I'm going to just condense them into 2 main groups. We have catastrophic flooding, like tidal surge and hurricane floods. And then we have non-catastrophic flooding, the groundwater, the urban flooding, the stream flooding. And the campaign raised awareness greatly about the risks for groundwater, urban, and stream flooding. So people recognized that, hey, this is real and this happens. And it shows us that when people typically hear the word, oh, flooding, your house is at risk, most people's brains go to, my house isn't at risk of a hurricane, or I live halfway up the hill, a tidal wave isn't going to do anything to me. But they don't think about these other types of flooding. And the campaign did a great job of raising awareness on that.
So, thank you, Nathan. So, what are some of the lessons that we learned from all of this? Well, we learned, not maybe a surprise to anybody here, increasing public awareness is more difficult than it seems. You can do a lot, but changing those attitudes and beliefs it's challenging, and it takes time. So the other thing that we learned is that there's a real need to keep spreading this message. So as Nathan mentioned, 10% of people actually took some form of action, but most people just said that they were planning to. So they hadn't actually done anything concrete in reducing their flood risk, getting flood insurance, anything like that. And more importantly, about 40% of respondents from that follow-up survey said that they never saw any of the messaging. I will say it's a little bit disappointing that I think it was 90% in this room, but that's okay. That's all right. It reinforces this lesson learned. We need to keep spreading that message.
So one of the other lessons that we learned, and this slide looks like it contradicts the previous one, is that we did a good job in designing this questionnaire. We talked about the 5 different types of flooding, and I recall that it was actually a discussion way early on. Well, why don't we just ask people for their general, what is their general risk of flooding? We'll just ask a single question. And after conversation, we decided that we wanted to separate this out into the different types of floods. And to go back and look and see what would have happened had we kept a single question, I just created an index for the perceived risk of flood based off of all 5 measures. And what we found is that if you think that you're at a risk from a tidal surge, you think that you're at a risk from a tidal surge, right? If you think that you're not, you're not. So when it comes to this catastrophic flooding, everyone is binary. And so many people have an opinion about this, and there is no nuance, that if you ask just a single type of question, you're going to lose all of the data and all of the information in there. So we wanted to pat ourselves on the back for that. The other lesson that we learned here was there really was a change in behavior. People actually started doing stuff. We already saw that they started talking to neighbors, but we had a whole list of things that people could do to help be flood ready, to help mitigate the risks. Be it elevate something, be it clean a storm drain, be it clear off your property, all of these different things. And when we cut the data by those who had and those who do and do not recall seeing the ads, and we find that 94% of the people who see the ads have either done something or they have plans to do something soon, as opposed to only 3 out of 4 who have not seen the ads. So there's a real impact that people did something about this. And as we kind of are going through the basic lesson, they're more aware. They learn that there's different types of flood risks, but they also learn that there's small things that they can do to help mitigate the flood risks. So you combine these 3 things, and it led to a higher degree of confidence in being able to recover from a flood quickly and completely. So those who recall the campaign, about half of them have a high confidence in being able to recover from flood damage, as opposed to only about a quarter of them who do not recall seeing the campaign. Knowledge is power.
So this was really a kind of a neat takeaway. So while we did have a smaller sample size with our second follow-up survey, we did find that we had a roughly 6% margin of error at a 95% confidence interval. So that means that if we replicated this survey 100 times, we'd get the same results within plus or minus 6. So we can kind of use that as a proxy for the entire population of Oahu, and I'm going to do that now in this room. So we're going to pretend that all of you, as an individual, are representing a portion of Oahu's population, so you're it. So as a result of the outreach and education campaign, 3 out of 10 of you entered this informed awareness phase. So that means you started doing some research, talking to your friends and family, started thinking about, okay, what can I do to become more flood resilient? 2 out of 10 of you entered this planning phase. So you really started considering taking actions, making my emergency kit, cleaning off my property, maybe building a little drainage outlet so I can move that water away from my home. And 1 in 10 of you actually took action. So you got flood insurance, you did some of these flood risk reduction measures, you made your property and your family more flood resilient. So if we look at this room, 5 out of 10 of you did something. That means half the people in this space, representing the entire population, were positively impacted as a result of this outreach and education campaign in improving their flood risk. But, like anything, there's always room for improvement. So, some of the things that we learned as a result of this project is give more details than you think are needed. And also, it's really important when you're giving that information, do it as a package rather than a piecemeal approach. We didn't talk about it really because it was interesting. We didn't find a lot of statistical significance in any one of our particular outreach methods in comparison to others. But we did find that the postcards, in-person events, and a few more targeted types of outreach where this information was provided more as a sum of the whole, rather than social media or just trying to hand out flyers that didn't give that whole story, were more effective in influencing behavior and attitudes.
And then incentives work, money works, and this falls into both of these next 2 bullet points on provide some type of encouragement for taking follow-up action. Maybe create a gamification. Maybe create a website that says, hey, this is what your neighbors are doing. Or do this, submit proof to this, and you get a gift card for something. Those types of things work. And if we were able to do some things to help increase the response rates from the study, we have dozens upon dozens of studies that we've done, and we show that even a token incentive, $5, $10 for the first 500 people who complete this survey, boosts response rates pretty good, from about 4 to 7 or 8%. So if we could do something to help improve the way that the sampling was done, that's something that we would recommend.
And I think that brings us to our last bullet, think ahead. We didn't think about that when we scoped this project. We didn't really think about some of the costs associated with the mailers, so we didn't plan for that. So really be intentional when you're scoping a project or you know there's something that you want to do. Who are you gonna try to reach? What are you gonna do if you don't reach them in that initial effort? How are you planning for getting to them, and how much money is that gonna take you, and how much time? So while we were able to do, like I said, a lot, I'm very proud of everyone involved in this project. We didn't even have a full year to do it. So think ahead, give yourself as much runway and money and padding as you can, and I think that for me is one of the really big takeaways.
Yeah, and the study also got me thinking about how people react and how people recover from disasters. And we were talking a little earlier about some FEMA-backed studies that were done a while ago that show that neighborhoods that have close-knit neighborhoods, a high degree of social cohesion, that they can recover quicker from catastrophic events. Like they're the neighborhoods where everyone knows each other, and a flood happens, and the next day you have someone out there doing a barbecue. And I was fortunate a couple of years ago to be able to write a study to be able to measure this cohesion level, so we can try to identify how strong neighborhoods are in pockets of neighborhoods. But in thinking ahead on how we can work on disaster recovery, when we were talking earlier, that's a fun area to be able to explore. Like to go out and try to see if we can figure out, are there pockets where we can improve the cohesion of the neighborhood, get people closer together to help them recover from these things in a stronger manner. So if anyone has FEMA money and wants to learn this,
Or any other kind of funding, we're open.
yeah.
And with that, just want to say mahalo for your time and your attention, and if anyone has any questions, we're happy to answer them. I think we did really good. No one has questions.
I like questions, make them hard if you want.
Okay, Edie has a question. I will use this moment to also shamelessly plug, at that back right table, the only one with a white tablecloth, there is a QR code where you can find both our executive summary and the final report for this project. We didn't give you all of it. There's a lot of information also on people's experience with flooding in terms of recovery time and cost, their perceptions. There's a whole lot of additional information in both of those reports we didn't talk about today.
So great presentation. This is, of course, near and dear to my heart. So great information. Thank you very much. I did have a question about, were you able to gauge in any way, shape, or form if you gave them a hypothetical and said, well, you just got flooded, how do you plan to recover? I'm just curious how people think they're going to recover if they get, I do recognize the problem is they don't think they're going to get flooded to begin with, right? But I don't know if you were able to gauge that.
We did put in a hypothetical situation, and I can't recall exactly what the results were, but we asked people to imagine that they had 3 to 6 inches of water sitting on their property for a couple of days. How confident are they that they could recover from this? How much do they think it would cost, and how long do they think it would recover from this?
It's all in the executive summary, which you can find via the QR code at the back table.
No, that's good. Thank you. Thank you.
We had one more question.
Hello, Sarah. Thanks for the great presentation. And I think we've seen similar types of percentages for similar types of studies. And did you encounter a large population that was denies hazard risk, like they're very skeptical that would happen, and was that like a factor in them taking action?
So, yes. I asked the question here of, how many people believe that it changed attitudes. And our first handful of run-throughs through the data were like, wow, what we basically found is that there are these people who are just like, I'm not at risk, none of this is real, there are no storms, it's not increasing, and with that group of people, the marketing campaign didn't change any of their minds, and we just don't think, there's always going to be a segment of the population where you're not going to change their mind. They're true believers in one way or the other. But we did identify that those people exist, and we saw this through the data.
So John Bradford, National Weather Service. So I have a vested interest in the component that you interviewed about the trusted sources of information. And I understand, I know the answer would be read the executive summary. But I wonder if you could give a quick nutshell recap of anything interesting that you found in that part of the survey.
Yeah, actually, we did find it pretty surprising, but the city and county was one of the most highly trusted sources of information, which in today's somewhat politically polarized environment, we did find pretty shocking, but we were really proud about. Not a lot of governments can really make that claim in that statement. Another extremely trusted source, if I remember correctly offhand, was friends and family, so word of mouth. That's where I think it becomes all the more important, especially in today's climate of disinformation, to make sure that you are tapping those trusted news sources and being the first one to tell the story, and not allowing the disinformation to be the first thing that people hear, because it's, as we learned from this, it's really challenging to change attitudes and beliefs. So the first story is the true story, and good luck changing that narrative after the fact.
And I'm going to chime in with a little bit more context, because we do a lot of studies where we ask about information sources, we ask about who they trust, we ask about what they do. Actually, the favorite one that I've done in recent memory was for a library district in rural Washington. But when we ask these questions, we pretty routinely see local government, local agencies, local community centers as being highly trusted sources. So it does seem surprising that government receives any trust from people in a highly politicized world. But local government appears to be different. People trust their local government. People trust their communities.
I will say too, if people are interested in the data set, you can email us and we can potentially provide it to you. Not all of the findings are in either the executive summary or final report. That's just an intentional choice. Some of it we wanted to just keep internally, but we can potentially make that available. Any other questions? We have a lot of time. We can give that back to you, but we are happy to answer questions.